So he's going to be out for quite a while.
Sure.
So yeah, just a minute.
They rescheduled my wife's surgery for December 10th. And I have my x-rays on Halloween.
You said she's up and moving around now.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So Todd and Todd's father had a heart attack last week, and he did pass away. And then speaking of brain tumors, Andrea Barker, knows her. Andrea Barker was a member here for years, and dear sweet lady, and she moved to Pocatello and now has moved to Nampa, but she had taken a fall last week or so, and she went in and they took images to see if she had broke anything, and then found a brain tumor. So she goes to talk to the neurosurgeon on this coming Tuesday.
She had a relation to Ted, or
They pretended like they were, but.
Do the Lucasons live in the same place they did when they came back from Texas?
Yeah,
The house they originally lived in?
yeah,
So I have that address. You said it was his father?
yeah.
What was his name?
Scott.
Scott. Okay.
Testing. Any other prayer requests? So we got Carter's squad mate, Jan, his wife, Todd's father, Andrew Barker.
James, we get back through that.
Okay. All right. Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. And thank you for this time where we can come and study a portion of your word. Please help this study to be fruitful and to help us to consider the things that your inspired author meant us to consider, so that we might become the people that you want us to be. We pray for Carter's squad mate and the health issues he's going through. Pray that he can get this tumor treated and that he would heal up, and that Carter and his department can support him and his family in this challenging time. Pray for Jan and his wife and scheduled surgery. Pray that she's healthy for that and that goes well, and that there are no issues there with her recovery. Pray that Jan's x-rays show something that's treatable and benign and all those things as well. We pray for Todd and just the whole Lucas family, Father. They are dear to us, and their loss of his father is something that's tragic, and we pray that we can support them and show them love and care during this time. We pray for Andrea Barker and her brain tumor, and just pray that you would find her some treatment and heal her, and she'd be able to just come back to full health. We also pray for Damon as he's hurt his back, and pray that he would get some rest find some healing. Be back with us very soon. We pray for all those who couldn't be with us this morning. And we pray this in your son's name, Jesus.
Amen.
All right, so my first question to you all is, did anybody attempt to put a Socratic discussion question together on the materials that we studied this week? We were...
No, or that's a question.
Yeah, it should be in the vein of kind of what we've been doing, which is a challenging question which examines the tensions and various things within the story. Helps us think more clearly about it. Bueller?
I got one.
Okay.
Jonathan, as a member of the Jewish nation, would have been bound by the commandment, honor thy father and mother. What would be his answer to the charge that he was not honoring Saul by his allegiance to David?
Absolutely. And Michael as well. Right? Michael and Jonathan are both children of Saul who are experiencing these conflicts of loyalty. And Michael, even almost more so, because she is now the wife of David and the son and the daughter of Saul. So does she owe loyalty to Saul? Does she owe loyalty to her husband David?
She seems more conflicted. And Jonathan is single-hearted.
He's all on board.
He's all.
He's making oaths. He's protecting David. He's hiding him out and giving him all the good inside scoop.
And so was he in fact in disobedience to the law? Or was God honoring his? He in fact somehow in God's eyes was honoring Saul with disobedience.
I think that's an excellent question.
He covered the end of where I was going. In the study portion, part of that, it talks specifically about not going against God. It said, you're supposed to honor your father and your mother, but if they ask you to do something that goes against the will of God, then you don't have to do it.
And my picture of this, when we have other people bring questions, is that the person who brought the question facilitates the discussion. If you don't want to do that, it's okay. I can facilitate the discussion. So does anybody agree or disagree with that? Once our parents ask us to violate God's law, we do not owe them obedience. Agree? Disagree?
At the height of Saul's anger towards his son for this loyalty as he sees it in his eyes. In verse 30 of chapter 20, he says, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you are choosing the son of Jesse to your shame, to the shame of your mother's nakedness?" He's insulting his own wife. You son of a perverse adulterer, perverse, rebellious woman. That's his wife that gave birth to Jonathan. So that's the extent to his anger even.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't he take a spear to him at that time too?
Don't recall that.
Does he go after Jonathan with the spear?
He does.
So,
This isn't an answer to that question, but it seems like there's just one thing after another through these chapters that very weird things that are happening to protect David, that if you look at him individually, it looks like David going to the Philistines. That seems wrong to me. And yet it was to protect him, or David going to the priest to get fed. You know, there's all these shady things that kind of to preserve David, or David sending his family to the Moabites. They're the enemy, and but it seems like there's one thing after another in these stories that if you look at each one individually, they seem very questionable. Like you have to choose right or wrong here, and right or wrong isn't so black and white. Maybe in the end, it preserved. It saved David's life to allow him to be king. But anyway.
Okay. I want to challenge us to consider the stories of Jonathan and Michael before we move on to David's story. I want to push back a little bit to get us to think through the other side of this argument. We've had it presented very well that Saul is kind of a maniac at this point. He's unhinged. He's insulting his own wife and children, and he's very concerned about his own legacy and his throne, and trying to kill David to ensure this destruction. So from the other side, which is what the author is trying to show to us, right? That Jonathan and Michael are in difficult situations because they are the children of Saul, the king, the anointed king, the king that David won't lift a hand against. And so as the children of this king, do they owe him loyalty? Right. And maybe it's not even children, as subjects of the king, right? As people that are part of the kingdom, you owe your king loyalty when he is in rebellion, when he is acting in the ways that Saul acted.
Just 2 verses down from what Brother Royce was reading in chapter 20, verse 33. But Saul hurled the spear at him to kill him, and Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. So at that point right there, Saul's trying to kill his own flesh and blood. So at that point, how loyal should he expect Jonathan to be to him?
Mm-hmm. Valid question. How loyal should Jonathan be to the king, to his father? That's okay. That's fine.
Same people, like it has to do with the position, not the person. So I would argue, regardless of what somebody's doing or done, it doesn't matter. God has still called us to respect and honor. And I don't know. I think that there are ways that you can do that, like Jonathan did, without necessarily agreeing or following the steps. So I think that there is a way to do that. And I don't know, Jesus tells us that we give to Caesar what is Caesar's, like all the things, like it's like, regardless of what they are doing, I feel like God has put people in positions of authority, and it isn't our place to, you know, like we still have to a certain degree. I don't like these credits. No, I definitely see where you guys are coming from. Like, you don't want to follow a lunatic and be respectful to a lunatic, but at the same time, he was God's anointed one, and David made it very clear that you don't kill, you know, God's anointed one, and you don't, you know, like you are still, they're in that place of authority.
We could all sit on 2 pews next week and make this much easier. Just kidding.
Well, this particular passage, of course, is all about King Saul. And the frame of the image is squarely around King Saul. And David is the outlier, and he's the future king. And the issue here is that Saul has the authority, the mantle from God. And he should be the center of this picture. But because of Saul and who he is and how he's behaved, how he's interacted with his family and with David, over a period of a few chapters, the frame that is squarely around Saul is going to be wrenched out, and it's going to be put on the next image, and that's David. But Saul is the center of all of this. Saul's son, Jonathan, Saul's servant, David, Saul's daughter. And so the tension here is Saul could have had it all. And they still feel loyalty and love for him. And they still acknowledge him as God's appointed. And so this is the way that the framework illustrates the blessing that God provided for Saul. And Saul threw it all away.
Okay. Carter, you look like you got something to say. Okay. All right. So good. Excellent question, Royce. Hopefully we can see that there's a real tension here, and even the characters themselves, Jonathan and Michael, they don't disobey Saul, right? But they are in this mode of kind of active thwarting of his evil purposes, right? They are working against him in subtle ways that will allow King David to escape, that will allow him to live, that will get him resources he needs. He's not yet the king, but they know that he's the chosen one, that Saul has fallen, and so they still owe loyalty to him and obedience to him as far as they can give it. But there is also this subtle tension underneath. So excellent question and notice. I want to consider also the two stories of David and Saul with the priests of Nob. Okay, so this is an interesting case. It comes up in the New Testament as well. I really want to understand it primarily from the context that we're reading it right now. Maybe at the end of this part, we can try to understand what Jesus is telling us. But for this, so David's on the run. He goes to Nob. He finds the priests at the tabernacle there, and he asks for the bread. He asks for bread, and the priest says, "Well, all I have is the bread of the presence, which was just changed." Which tells us that this is the Sabbath, that David is fleeing on the Sabbath. That's part of the context here. In Leviticus 24, verse 5 through 9, it explains how the bread of the presence was to be changed out. There's 12 loaves, and so David is receiving this bread, which is specified that is for the priests to be eaten in the sanctuary, which is defined as the courtyard of the tabernacle. Okay. So that's our context here. And the most explicit condemnation that Saul gets is when he takes on the role of a priest, right? This is the problem that Saul keeps running into. In 1 Samuel 13, 14, 15, 3 times, Saul just happens to be at an altar with a bunch of animals, making a sacrifice to the Lord, and he keeps getting caught and told, "You got to stop this. Don't do this. This isn't for you." And so here David is at the tabernacle taking food for the priests. He's not a priest, so my question to you is David violating the law, taking on the role of a priest, overstepping his boundary, or is this imminent danger from Saul, some sort of justification, some sort of imminent need that has to be answered with a maybe an exception? What's going on here? nobody has an opinion either way. Dave, Dirk's got an opinion.
I have to admit, I'm coming at this without reading very much this week, but I feel like from what I remember about Saul, he's doing it his own way, and he is. It's all about more about him. It's not about doing what God says. And then if we wanted to relate that to what we could do, I mean, what happens to us, what we see around us, there are people who are spiritual people, and we could also be spiritual people and choose to do it our own way. And so we always have to be mindful of that, right? And I have to put myself below God and do what he says, right? That's kind of, I guess that's what I'm thinking of.
So some sort of intention, you think, is the difference? Saul's intent is to bring glory on himself, or he's fearful of losing this battle.
I think it seems like to me he has a need. Saul is using God and using this office for his own purposes, whether he chooses to do it or he just does it.
Okay.
That's what I think.
Anybody agree or disagree?
I think I probably agree. The way I would frame the Socratic question, if I could write one around this and David's life, much in the Old Testament is, are we condoning situational ethics, or are there overriding laws of God that are to be obeyed, period? And I think when we come to questions like this, that's what's going on. I think in Jesus' case, the Pharisees were, since they didn't like Jesus, they found fault, but they liked David, so they didn't find fault. And they sort of had a situational view of looking at everything. But I find I have a situational view of looking at everything too, and it's not always so clear. These things are all complex. That to me is the question: how do we avoid just falling into doing what's right in our own eyes, essentially, situational ethic in our own lives, by using these examples in whatever way we choose to use them? I think because the priest gave him the bread, I don't think he actually broke the law, because I think once they changed it out, it was the priest to give, but I'm certainly not sure about that. But regardless, to me, the big challenge of these stories is, how do we, well, law was made for man, man wasn't made for the law, so, then I just go justify all sorts of things in my own life, situationally. Is that really what God intends? How do I walk through life not doing that? And there's lots of examples of this that Christians have struggled with over the years. I shouldn't talk this much. I'll tell one story. So I read this story of a lady who was in a concentration camp in Germany, early part of the Second World War. In the early part, if you got pregnant, they'd send you out. So many of the Jewish women there would have sex with the guards in an attempt to get pregnant, and if they did, they could get out. She did. She got out. She came back to America where all her other family was. They raised that child. They loved that child. That child was her savior. Is that right or is that wrong? So these are the hardest questions, I think. I've talked too much here.
So it's more for the online people that watch the class.
I get John's point, but I also get, I think, in real life, the idea of following one rule, one way. And I feel like that kind of reduces I don't feel like that's God's intent or desire for us to just follow a rule. I think it's more about the heart and why we choose to do it a certain way, not just because we have to do it. And so that's why I feel like it is more gray a lot of the times. And if we are truly in the Word, living by the Spirit, it's very evident what we should be doing. And so I don't know in terms of that story what the answer is. But I don't think that a lot of gray, and God desires that gray because he gave us a free will and he gave us, this need to seek after him. And if we are truly have his Holy Spirit in us, guiding us, then it's okay.
Let's bring it back to the text, just a little bit more concretely around David and in this situation. Do you agree that David didn't do anything wrong here and is right, whereas Saul in some way in his imitation of the priests is failing? Or do you think that they're both in the wrong, or maybe they're both in the right? I guess that's probably not an option.
So what's happening here was,
I get two microphones. I get a right side and a left side.
so in the context, it seemed like he was going there because he was hungry, and looking for nourishment, because he didn't ask initially for showbread. He just whatever you could find. So it was save a life, or well, Luke, Jesus kind of talks about it, but I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? That's in the context of what Jesus is talking about, this same thing. But it seems like, again, it's a story of saving David's life. He's not there for offerings. It doesn't seem to me like he's there to act as a priest, but to save his men by giving them nourishment.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else agree or disagree? We're in 1 Samuel chapter 20, or excuse me, chapter 21. Okay, good. Hopefully we have explored some of those tensions that are here in the story. I understand that it's uncomfortable to say, I'm not going to give you like, this is the right answer. Think about this. And I think it's uncomfortable for us, especially as kind of like modern Western people that would like categories and would like, to know what should I, what's the flow chart for David to reach undefiled kingship and all these things. But for at least the way that I can read this story is that the author is trying to play with these tensions intentionally in order to help us see that this is a very difficult situation that David's going through. And then as we examine Saul in the next chapter, he's going to then murder the priest and all the priests that were there in vengeance for helping his enemy, even though they didn't realize that he was on the run and all these things. And so it's clearly, at least to me, like we're supposed to look at David's situation and say, this is difficult, but David is doing this thing where he's trying to be the king. He's asking for bread. He's not asking to take on this role, but God's Messiah one day will take on that role, right? This is what this story is pointing to. It's like Jesus is going to be the king, and he's going to be the high priest, and he's the prophet. He's all these things together. So when David is kind of giving us glimpses and flashes of this, it's all pointing towards God's Messiah one day, just not this day. And so for David, it's like, don't go down that road, David. Like we saw Saul do this a couple chapters ago. It didn't work out well. And he doesn't in that way. He has his own faults and failures. But hopefully we can see that this is these are challenging things to work through. And Jesus uses this example of David as a forerunner for himself, as the one who is fulfilling the law on the Sabbath, as the priest, as the king, doing these things. Yeah.
It seems like the more you read this story, you realize this is such a spiritual battle going on that it's not just Saul chasing him, but Satan is chasing David and trying to everything he can to defeat him. And so you you see all these things that make you gasp, like what he's going to the he's going to eat showbread, and that you think, why would he do that? And then I think the people that, as you read these stories, you think, he's, but it seems like God's hand is in this, and yet through great difficulty, I mean, all the priests died because of this, and so it just seems like there's this huge spiritual battle between God and Satan to bring on a new king, and it's enacted through Saul and all of his bad actions, I guess.
Yeah. Let's do one more question. So I want you to imagine this. You're a warrior serving under David, spending time in the desert. You're defending, you're keeping safe a people that are just kind of living their daily lives, right? They're shepherds, they're farmers mostly. You spend long nights, early mornings on watch. You've been in battles with nefarious bands of raiders and local warlords that send out raiding parties and just thieves and people that are living on the edge, trying to take what isn't theirs. In the midst of all this, along comes a holy day. It's a holy day that means a lot to you. It brings back memories of your childhood and your family days spent at the tabernacle with feasts and games and joy. And that holy day is coming up very soon. So David sends you and 9 others to a local elder and benefactor, Nabal, in order to bring back some treats and foods as a celebratory bonus. It's for morale, but it's also just for celebration of this holy day. But Nabal sends you back empty-handed, and he insults your commanding officer. Okay. Now, should David, getting this word from you, take matters into his own hands, demand satisfaction from Nabal and his people, which will probably keep his men loyal and backing him, or should he let God get vengeance someday, maybe, allowing Nabal to continue to take advantage of David and his men, and probably, surely, similarly mistreat those within his own domain? What should David do?
Well, letting God deal out punishment was not the thought pattern that David had, because David decided he was going in there and he was going after Nabal. And Abigail, in her wisdom and fear of the worst, intercepted him and gave him all kinds of gifts and stuff and said, you're way better than my awful husband. Spare him. And basically she said, God will deal out justice. And we know 10 days later he died.
I'm sorry, so which side do you think what should David do?
Well, I think David was right in the way he did it, because actually God intervened and made it all work out great without David saying, I'll just let you handle it.
So you should go get vengeance.
Yeah.
Strap on the sword. Let's kill a lot of people. Okay? Anybody agree or disagree?
So as a soldier in David's army, right, I obviously want him to gather the boys and go kick Nabal in the teeth, right? Because I'm one of the boys, right? And so we go and ask what seems like a reasonable request to a wealthy man, considering all that, myself and all these other warriors have done, right? So I as a warrior, I want David to go Spartan kick this guy, right? However, as David and as the commanding officer, I would hope that David would have the wherewithal to see the precedent that something like this sets, right? And so, yes, we are protecting the people. Yes, we are providing a service. However, it becomes very authoritarian, and it appears very authoritarian when we request something from wealthy members of those we are protecting, and then when that is not provided to us, then we come in and essentially we demand it and take it, right? And so that sets a very bad tone, and a huge, rift between those protecting and those who are protected. So again, initially, as a soldier, I would hope David, goes on the warpath. However, again, I would hope that eventually my commanding officer, that guy who's supposed to be in charge, would have the cool-headed response of not taking that trick.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
In chapter 25, verse 34, after Nabal did die and he had Abigail as his wife, when David heard that Nabal was his dead, he said, "Praise be to the Lord, who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head." So it seems like David learned a lesson that if he would have done that, it would have been wrong. And although he was about to do it, but it seems like God protected him.
What would Saul have done? I think that's the question, right? It's like, what would Saul have done in this situation? He would have killed Nabal, his whole family, and everybody that ever heard, knew him, right? And so that's the difference between David and Saul. And we have this intervention from Abigail, which is this beautiful, beautiful story, elevating her role and turning away David's wrath into understanding what's right.
I'd like to see the hand of God in and behind all this, and not necessarily orchestrating it, but bringing people into David's lives that will bring him back to sanity. He's foilable. He's capable of wrongs, just like any other man. But he does this again with Nathan later on, when David sins with Bathsheba. David is brought back to his senses, and God clearly sent Nathan, the prophet, to him. In this case, I'd like to think that Abigail appeals to his better side in the whole matter.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, I don't think the big difference here specifically, and maybe even overall, is that whether or not David and or Saul would have gone on the warpath, right? Because we see clearly in the text that David would have gone on the warpath and taken that particular route. I think the big distinction here that we see between David and Saul, like Royce was saying, is that when these chances to be repentant or be swayed are given to David, David takes it, right? David takes them, and he's willing to see the error of his ways, and he's willing to change. I would think that in spite of Abigail, Saul would have taken the warpath. Right? I think that's the big difference, right? Not whether or not David and Saul would have gone on the warpath, whether or not David and Saul could have been swayed by somebody who is making that effort, who God is using to bring them back to that correct path.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a beautiful place, I think, to wrap it up today. That we hopefully are attentive to God speaking to us through His Word, speaking to us through this body of believers that we're a part of. People that come into our lives, maybe just random clues, right? Giving us some sort of caution or petition. We're attentive to that and understand that the choices that we make shape us into the people that we will be. And hopefully we can become more like Jesus and less like other things. Anything else before we wrap up today? All right. Well, thank you for your attention this morning.